Right then guys, we're going to cover how you can set up your Wacom stylus and tablet. If you're left-handed, you need to set it up in the settings in the control panel. But in terms of what you get right out of the box, if I just paint now, you can see some lines I've done earlier. You get, no matter how hard you press, you get a solid line. Okay, notice I'm working on a new layer here. So to set it up, there are some quick set options up here in the options bar. If you turn those on for starters and have a go, you can see I'm getting a fainter line when I press. That's the type of line that you need when you're sketching. You shouldn't expect to draw your shape just in one stroke. You should be expecting to have to go around it. So if I was drawing the edge of that, the first problem, I can't draw at the angle of that fish. It's just the way my hand is. So there is a tool. If you press R, you get the rotate tool, and you can move the angle of your canvas, and that allows you to work in that diagonal angle. So B for back to brush. So if I now want to work on the fish, actually I still need that to be tilted even more. You can see where that's my natural angle for drawing. So I'll rotate it more, and I probably need to rotate it the other way actually. Probably more like that. That's better. So I can now work my way around doing multiple strokes across the fish. Doesn't matter if you've got, multiple lines showing up, as long as you can see the thickest one through it. And then you carry on. I'll need to rotate to do the tail as well in that direction. Space bar to pull it across. B for brush to get back on it again. And I can start to sketch that side of it. I'm just going to go into the settings and show you some of the extra things you can do on that if that's not quite working out for you. So by pressing those buttons up there, it turned on shape dynamics here, and it put it on pen pressure. That's how come you can now have light, you can press hard and you can do light touch, and you get that there. The other one affected pen pressure for opacity, so as you lift off, it's not as dark. So the first one changes whether it's thick, like that, or thin. That's what the first button we pressed was. The second one makes it pale or black. Alright, so you shouldn't really need to do much more than them two. I'm going to turn on smoothing as well, because that helps a little bit. The little preview down the bottom here is what you need to see. You need your brush to be tapered, that way you can lift off and it doesn't just stop abruptly like it did with these ones here. So I'll just collapse them up again and we'll carry on and rotate it. B for brush, get back on again. I need to carry on drawing that. Do the eyes. Now if you still feel that everything's a little bit strong, you can turn down the opacity and the flow, and it lets you put multiple strokes on without being quite as destructive. So that works a bit like a light touch with a pencil. Okay, turning them down, I've got to press really hard. So once I get the practice stroke right, I can then press harder and I'll get a thicker line, and that will become my outline. Not looking for a work of art. I'm looking for a silhouette that you can follow as an orthographic image at the back of Blender. Alright? So now it's lighter. That actually feels much better to me. I can do the multiple strokes, and then when I'm happy I'm on the right line there, I can press harder and get the line that I want. So see, I started off a little bit off there. It should look sketchy like this. If you know in Blender, it's just a quick reference, isn't it? It definitely works if you can do longer strokes rather than short, jabby strokes. And you could use, let's say you've got a circle there, we could use this ellipse tool here, rotate it back to where it was. Not sure what the shortcut is to get it back to where you started, but well, I could just grab a circle there like that and then paint inside of that. you'd fill the whole eye in like that. Because circles are a pain for anybody. And I don't want you to dwell on the graphic side of it too much. So if there's squares, there are limits on what shapes you can use in there. There aren't many. You could use the pen tool and turn that into a selection. But at some point, you need to take control of the sketching side of it. So if I deselect it, you can see there, that eye is good enough to use as a guide. So B, back on the brush again. Okay, and every so often, go back in your layers panel, turn off the original scanned image and have a look at what you've got until it's good enough to use as an orthographic. Right, why are you two facing away from me, guys? It's a bit ignorant, isn't it? Right, there's another step to this, because as well as the sketch, I want you to block it in and add a little bit of shading so that you know in your mind where the light's going to fall and how it will look. And it's also to evidence that you understand some of the more advanced tools in here. Now, if you want distinctions, you need to do a pretty good job of this aspect of it, okay? Because this is the practical element of this unit. So it's going to be art-based. Now, it's not as bad as you think. So you can see all the other layers I've got here from when I've done other demos. So we'll imagine that sketch is finished. I'll just do a little bit more on it and just bring that round freehand. So I would ignore that element there. His tail, very hard in a small window. Yeah, probably would have needed to draw the fins. So I'll get an orange colour, and you can colour pick this from a reference image. So if you've got a reference image open next to it, if you press Alt, it lets you colour pick from anywhere on that canvas. So if you had a photograph over here and you want to know which orange your fish was going to be, or your poker ball, or whatever it is, just hold Alt and click, and you get the eyedropper tool, all right? It's a really quick way to work rather than going up there, press an eyedropper, then going back to the image again. Right, so to use the colour tool, I need to turn everything off again so we get a solid block colour. So that off, then back on 100%, pop back into the brushes menu, take them off. Otherwise you'll find blocking in this part of it here really difficult. You don't want any transparency, nothing like that on there. So I'm going to use the square right bracket to make the brush bigger. And I'm going to do the main parts of it, and then I'll decrease the size of the brush. Right, one tool I want to show you about. Can you see how it's a bit knobbly? I'm struggling to do a straight edge with it. If you go back in the brushes thing here, the problem area is this thing here. By default, you get this spacing effect between brush strokes. So no matter how gentle you are, when you go like that, you will get that effect. So that has to be turned off for this element, for the colouring in. You could turn it off for your strokes as well. You'll get a smoother stroke. So don't disable it, because that causes chaos. But turn it right down to 1 or 0%. And then when you try and do a smooth stroke, like so, you'll get what you're after. Now I want it to look a bit painterly. It needs to look like somebody painted this, not like somebody did it as a piece of vector art. So if it's a bit knobbly, it's a bit knobbly. I'm going to rotate, because even colouring in, I struggle to do it if it's just horizontal. So the same thing applies again. I'm trying to do fairly long strokes with this, and I'm just nibbling away until it's what I want. So the first one's a little bit rough, so I'll go again, like so. If I don't like any of it, I press E for eraser, and I can take it out that way. I can have a big brush on the eraser and just very slowly just nibble away the edge that I don't want. I think that's on a soft brush, so it'll just get rid of the crudeness of your painting. Right, go back to the brush again. Make the brush smaller. Oh, don't know what I hit there, some sort of shortcut. Now if you go a little bit away from what your original sketch was, it's fine. As long as you could still use it as your 3D model background, your orthographic. Right, that's step one. That's called blocking in. The reason we fill it, it could be any colour, it doesn't have to be the colour your model's going to be, actually, because the next stage is to add the shading. And because we've got a solid block of colour, what we do over here, we'll call that blocking colour. I'm going to put a layer above it, and I'm going to make it a clipping mask, which means it'll ignore the transparent areas. It'll only put paint down where it's got colour, which in this case is just the fish, the blocking in that we've done. So if I go back over here and change this to a very dark orange, because I'm going to do, in fact I'll make it black for a second because I want to show you something. The other thing you're going to need when you start your colouring in is a direction that the light is coming from. So you can just keep an eye on where the light areas are, where the shading is. So the way that you indicate that is you just draw an arrow, like a 3D arrow. So up here, am I on black? Am I on eraser? I think I'm on a clipping mask, and that's why I need to be back on the colour layer again. If I just draw an indication with a kind of a 3D arrow there like that, it's a very thick brush. So the light is the sun, if you like, is coming from that angle. So how would that affect the fish?
Yeah, lighter.
Light on the top, dark on the bottom. Probably a bit of a diagonal. So I'll go back to this shading layer. Okay, choose. I'm going to hold Alt and select that orange, which allows me to go back in. I've got the original colour. I can do a light version for the highlights. In fact, I'm going to make it really light. I'm going to make the brush bigger, and I'm going to change the brush, because for shading you want a really soft brush. You don't want something that's hard. So we really want something like that there. You could go for an airbrush if you want to, and you need these turned back down again. You don't want full colour, otherwise your shading will look horrific. And then you can just, that's a bit strong, but all I'm doing there is I'm touching it very gently to do that top edge. I'm going to make that brush a lot smaller. Just collapse that area there. I think that needs, I'll undo it a bit because I think that's too strong. Right, so I'll make them even less than they are now. So it takes multiple passes to do it. That's much gentler, alright? So the whole of that top edge needs lightening up with a soft brush. I'm going to do a very light, very light touch on the edge of that shading. And then I'll alt-click that original orange and choose a dark version of it. And I'll do the same at the bottom. Probably have some shade in there as well. You've got to think about the 3D shape as well. Is anybody doing anything that's kind of a plasticky effect, material-wise? You've got metallic, haven't you? A lot of you have got metallic. So imagine this was an orange sword and you want glints coming off it. All you would do for that is set this to white. Have a fairly small brush to start you off. And just put a bit of a dab in there. I'll turn these back up again for the very first part of it, and then I'll turn it back down. So this is called specular highlight. We've covered this before. We've talked about speculars and diffusers. So you would start with a bright element to it, and then just turn the opacity right down again and blend it, because the colour, the highlight should spread. It shouldn't be as hard as that. That would be a really strange surface if it was like that. And I can just gently just feather out that specular highlight like that. It is doing it. Don't worry if you think it isn't. It should take multiple passes to blend it in. And that's a very big highlight. But you get the idea. If you had a thin part of it on a sword, you know, you would draw it as a line and then feather the line in. I only want one highlight if you've got a shiny surface. And that's about all I want, really. Fairly basic. Show the shade, show the highlight, the general highlight. If it needs a specular highlight, pop that on, and that's it done. But you need it from 3 views. Don't want you to take more than about 30 minutes on it. Setting up your brush will be the trickiest bit, so you may have to go back to this or shout me across, and I'll help you with it. Work on different layers. It will be catastrophic if you do the outline and then the colouring in on the same layer. Because ultimately, if I go back to my layers here, things in life don't have a line around them, do they? But when you're drawing, you always draw the outline because you need a guide. So what you should be aiming for, in fact, I've already got my sketch turned off. So there was the sketch. There it is off. I've done the thing I told you guys not to do. I've got the sketch and the blocking on the same layer, but there's no line around that fish. Adding the highlight, the shade, that is what gives it its definition. Yours will look a bit wobbly when you do it because it's very hard to get used to these things, but that's fine. As long as you think you could in Blender, line up your curves with where you would have drawn it had you had a bit more practice, then so be it. Right, I'd like this phase finished in this lesson, guys. So get cracking. Get your paper sketch, get it scanned, get it in Photoshop, sketch it out, set your brushes up, etc. Block it in, and then add another layer and do your shading.